Hi there everyone. Today I'd like to present my paper on the identity, values, and worldviews of heritage Buddhist teens in the US. At the outset of this study on the values and identity of Buddhist teenagers in the United States, I presented a preliminary paper in 2025, which I have linked in the notes below outlining educational provision for Buddhist children, but it lacked sufficient sample size and methodological detail. Due to space constraints, I won't repeat the earlier literature review on parenting, schooling, and youth initiatives. Instead, this paper focuses on methodology, findings from the first 12 of 46 focus group questions, and comparisons with similar UK research using the same age group and measures. Research on religion in individual differences psychology has focused on measurable aspects of behavior, attitudes, practice, belief, and affiliation. Because religious values are often subconscious, they are inferred from patterns in attitude responses, some reflecting identity and belonging. However, quantitative correlations cannot determine causality, for instance, whether practice leads to identification or vice versa. While such methods are valuable, qualitative approaches help practitioners interpret meaning and context. Focus groups, for example, efficiently gather open-ended responses, revealing both consensus and differing views. This study is not fully grounded, as it uses pre-selected values categories from prior research to enable comparison across religions and continents. Although teenagers may express themselves less clearly than adults, their unfiltered perspectives, shaped by ongoing changes in values and identity, offer meaningful insight for religious education. This study builds on well-established UK research from the 2010s, using comparable questions rather than redesigning them. 4 focus groups of 6 to 10 self-identifying Buddhist teenagers were held in temples between December 2024 and September 2025. The 46 questions were drawn from earlier studies such as Halsall and London, with 12 key questions on values such as priorities, fears, purpose, and identity from my own publications going back to the period 2013 to 2015. Discussions were conducted to saturation, transcribed verbatim, and analyzed using NVivo, with themes coded under 35 subheadings and summarized in tables. Findings are presented as the voice of the group, with individual quotes identified using pseudonyms to preserve anonymity. I worked with 30 from projected 50 10 to 21-year-old self-identifying Buddhist participants, who were drawn from California's Sinhalese, Bangladeshi, and Thai communities, including teenagers of mixed marriage between Asian and Black or Asian and white parents, and including 6 Buddhist teenagers published testimony from Pianando's 2018 book Sharing Buddhism in the Western World. The sample focused on heritage Buddhists and mostly adherents to Theravada Buddhist practice, the researcher, for the record, also being a convert insider to Theravada Buddhism. So turning to my findings, the most important values in the lives of the Buddhist teens interviewed were their future, family, friends, finding out about themselves, their interests, passions, hobbies, money, school/grades, good memories, food, sleep, religion, and jobs. And to save time, I display the teen quotes as slides during the presentation, letting you read them for yourselves. Inspiration for Buddhist teenagers' hope included seeing people help strangers, receiving opportunities unavailable to others, engaging in efforts for things that involve delayed gratification, money equated often with possibilities, although it didn't directly bring happiness, it protected against indebtedness. They worried about their own uncertain futures, the what-ifs of life, and seemed resigned to prioritizing finances and a livable wage. They tiptoed around partisan politics and polarizing issues. U.S. teens showed little interest in civics or international affairs. The teens welcomed a little bit of competition or pressure to sustain their motivation. Parents were strong motivators with high expectations, although the pressure could sometimes be a distraction. They claimed college admissions had become less competitive, but finding employment more difficult. Asked what they wanted to get out of their lives, they said they aspired to financial security, good health, saying it was a form of treasure, which paraphrases Dhammapada verse 204, especially in the face of exorbitant healthcare premiums, travel to new places and opportunities, success, being able to help others and their family, although it wasn't clear if they were referring to parents or future kids, to becoming truly educated, perpetuate the family line, to revisit their roots in Asia, as if lack of adventure could hardly be considered a fulfilling life. They kept in touch with peers in person, at school, texted or used FaceTime, TikTok, Discord, or WhatsApp. It was considered unfriendly not to respond immediately to texts. The younger participants had to borrow their mom's phone to text friends. Some mentioned difficulty in keeping up long-distance relationships across time zones. A minority defined the word Sangha in a traditional narrow way as part of the Triple Gem, the community of Buddhist monks who follow the Eightfold Path. Most, however, define Sangha more broadly as monks and lay disciples. Some also connected the term with the community of lay congregant good friends, termed Kalyanamitta. Although the majority recognized meditation as important to Buddhism, they thought meditation could not be considered the entirety of Buddhist practice, which should ideally also include upholding 5 precepts and trying to better themselves as a person. They define meditation as thinking of nothing and focusing on the present, realizing the fundamental principles of the Buddha's teachings such as impermanence, suffering, and unsatisfactoriness, releasing stress, and knowing who you are as a being. In spite of meditation not being the whole of Buddhism, they enjoyed meditating. On the question of how they would explain Buddhism to someone new, some said they would start with the Four Noble Truths or to describe the core principles of Buddhism, variously as a way of family life, in other words, lifestyle, the human potential for enlightenment, in other words, philosophy, and when prompted, they also mention religion because Buddhism also includes chanting and prayer. Others emphasized lived Buddhism, so Buddhism's lifestyle aspect, what it meant within their day-to-day family life, or emphasized the practice of Buddhism outside of meditation, appreciating what you have and not being materialistic. In terms of Buddhist identities, some perceive different levels of Buddhist dedication in the Buddhist identity amongst other congregants visiting their temple. They consider themselves internet savvy, being able to filter out fake or hoax content and avoid cyberbullying. School warned pupils not to believe everything they saw online and fact-check. Although they didn't have specific methodology for this, the teens considered themselves savvy in this respect. Their study loads were heavy, leaving little spare time for playing video games. They valued music highly. K-pop appealed to Sri Lankans more than Thais. Bands mentioned specifically included Renee Rapp, Taylor Swift, and Balagra. They also made a distinction between the art and the artist. They said music energized them, helping wake them up in the morning. So to put these findings in context by comparing them with my own published findings 10 years earlier in the UK, US Buddhist teen values priorities were largely similar to the ones I found before. The UK Buddhists have previously ranked their top 5 values in decreasing order of importance as parents, education, friends, substance use, and community belonging. However, to these values priorities that US teens added the future, money, sleep, finding out about themselves, good memories, food, religion, and jobs. Things inspiring hope in US teens were similar to those found 10 years earlier in the UK, mentioning their feeling that they had to muddle along with an imperfect system, hoping to make the best of it. But in the US, there was more explicit but ambivalent mention of money than in previous generations, although US teens didn't seem as disillusioned as convert UK Buddhist teens 10 years earlier, who observed that hopes were going downhill. Fear of uncertainty figured prominently in the lives of Buddhists, but for 2025, US teens concerned risks that were unseen or intangible. By contrast, UK Buddhist teens a decade earlier feared tangible risks like crime, violence, rivalry, and walking home alone at night. Similar to UK teens 10 years earlier, US teens resented pressure by parents. Instead of fearing rivalry, US teens of the present day seem to accept and even relish rivalry as if distinguishing between distress and eustress in their lives. Asked what they want to get out of their lives, the answers from the US teens were not dissimilar from UK teens 10 years earlier, who also aim to help others to be better, to accomplish dreams and goals, and receive recognition from significant others. It should be noticed that expectations and the future were low priority values amongst UK Buddhist teens 10 years earlier. Previously, UK Buddhist teens had kept in touch with their friends by voice over mobile or landlines rather than by text or smartphone or computer apps in the contemporary America. A decade earlier in the UK, the definition of the word Sangha proved a bellwether of heritage or convert Buddhist teen identity. However, in the 2025 sample of US teens, the majority of heritage teens were starting to use a broad and inclusive definition of the word, more reminiscent of converts. A decade earlier, although UK heritage teen Buddhists didn't think meditation alone would make you a proper Buddhist unless you meditated more than most people and didn't apply it to gambling, 10 years earlier, some UK convert teen Buddhists defined meditation as a state of mind and therefore considered it the most important thing about Buddhism. UK teens considered meditation helped them through tough times, reducing stress at exam time, and made them more of a pleasure to be with. However, in 2025 America, none of the Buddhist teens found meditation sufficient to Buddhism, possibly because they were from heritage backgrounds. UK Buddhist teens had previously given examples of secular, post-secular, modernist, and supernatural interpretations of Buddhism. However, the US Buddhist teens tended towards secularized and pragmatic interpretations, reluctant to voice modernist interpretations considered divisive in the current US polarized climate, similar to Asian American Buddhists more generally in the US. In the previous decade, UK Buddhist teens had also echoed intrinsic and extrinsic aspects of religion with distinct sets of Buddhist attitudes for each. US Buddhist teens recognized shades of intensity in Buddhist identity of fellow congregants, reminiscent of the proper Buddhist distinction found a decade earlier in the UK. A decade earlier in the UK, video games have been played by Buddhist teenagers for an average of 1 to 2 hours per day, with only 19% claiming addiction, mostly amongst Buddhist male and heritage teens, although it should be noted that Buddhists were not significantly different in their video game behaviors than non-Buddhist teens. Teen Buddhists in the US seem to have less time or inclination to play video games than teens a decade earlier, although it should be noted that Los Angeles United School District currently limits pupil screen time and mobile phone use in school. A decade earlier in the UK, Buddhists had not been significantly different in their music consumption from non-Buddhist teens. 3/5 of UK Buddhist teens thought music important, so that's 61%, and that music affected their mood, so that's 64%, although this was not an attribute that differed significantly from teenagers in general. Similarly, attitude to music in the US didn't seem to reflect particularly on their Buddhist identity. So in conclusion, my impression of the expressions of Buddhist teenagers in the US in the 2020s compared with the similar research I conducted in the 2010s in the UK with an equivalent group is that the American Buddhist teens were more uncertain of their future, more certain of their family and religious identity, resigned to financial reliance with a diminished interest in world events, quicker to dismiss spirituality, savvy and strategic about online interaction and career planning, but still hopeful. There's a commonly cited stereotype of Americans writ large regarding life as serious but not hopeless, whereas British people regard life as hopeless but not serious, and this seemed to be reflected in miniature in the Buddhist teen values. I hope to gain further clarity in this research project by bringing the sample up to 50 to 60 with further focus groups before publishing, and may add poignant questions for the current times about ICE, abductions, school shootings, readiness, and attempts to impose a Christian nationalist agenda in school. If possible, I will try to include convert Buddhist teens in the US, although it would appear the heritage Buddhists in the US are beginning to occupy value space previously dominated by converts. Thank you.